This is the third interview with John Corley. It's December 10th, 1999, in the Lewis Music Library. This is the third interview with John Corley, and Fred Harris, who is the director of wind ensembles at MIT currently now, is also here. It's December 10th, 1999, and we're in the Lewis Music Library, and I'm Forrest Larson. So John, thank you again very much for coming. This is an honor and privilege to do this with you. Last interview we talked a lot about the MIT Concert Band, but there were some more questions that I wanted to ask, particularly about the culture that has developed around the MIT Concert Band. It's extraordinary. There's a band alumni association almost. I mean, they really stay in contact with each other. The college where I went to, there was no alumni association with the orchestra that I was in or any of the groups that I was in, and I think that's quite interesting. There's a particular rapport that you have with the students. Can you talk about this sense of community and the rapport that you've had with the students, and tell me something about that?
When I was interviewed for the position way back in September of what must have been 1948, it was explained to me that what was being pursued was somebody to occupy the students who couldn't be accommodated by the limitations of the orchestra, all the extra brass, the extra wind, percussion. Somebody who would occupy those people who really wanted to play in something in such a way that it would take their minds off their academic studies for 2 hours for rehearsal, which it was explained to me that a vigorous intellectual activity apart from their studies was as much therapy as reading a comic book or something like that. That the students, if they're away from their studies, needed to have something else to think about, which was so challenging that they couldn't think of anything but what they were doing at the music stand. The students were the thing. The emphasis was not on what music you were playing, but that the students had something worthwhile that would make them want to come back time after time. And right away we got into as much original music as I then knew about, which would be the Holst Suites 1 and 2, Vaughan Williams, Respighi. We were very limited as to how much original music was. It was a symphony by Ernest Williams, which was very nice, but now it's quite dated. And so almost immediately Andrew Kasdan, who was in that group, wrote a piece for us which was called March Baroque, and we ended up using it a great deal. And that led ultimately to 3 other compositions by Andy Kasdan. And we premiered them and took them on, quote, tours, which would be a weekend concert at Vassar or Smith College or Wellesley or LaSalle. The band was predominantly men. There might have been one co-ed. I remember a blonde co-ed playing cymbals, and every time she clapped the cymbals together, the air coming out from between the cymbals would make her hair fly up. And so I mentioned in rehearsal, when we get to such and such a beat, stop playing and look around at the cymbal player, and boom! And there was the hair flying up, coming back like a waterfall. That backfired though, because she quit. She didn't want to have that much prominence But as the band changed with more and more ladies in it, rehearsals changed too. I dignified my language more, and so we communicated more maturely. But the students were the thing. It was to keep the students occupied, to make them want to come back. Of course, a part of that was to always play something at the end of the rehearsal, hopefully in context, consecutively, that would end with an upbeat, maybe in the major. I could have been the minor too, but something that would, so as they were putting away their instruments, they were whistling the tunes. And one of them said, "Gee, you've got to come back for the next rehearsal," rather than end on a dominant chord or something like that, which doesn't work. I was shocked when I first an extra man in Boston Symphony, and the rehearsal ended on a dominant chord. Musicians didn't care; they just walked off the stage and begrudgingly looking at their watch if they'd been overtime a minute or something. Now, keep in mind, this was a part-time position for me. Nights. It was one night a week for a long time. We eventually got it to 2 nights a week, which meant that they played their instruments twice as much. Because the way it was, they were so busy as students, they would come 1 night a week and then put the instrument away for a whole week, wouldn't touch it. Be a lot of dust on the music cases, instrument cases. But by going to 2 times a week, it kept the embouchures in better shape, which was important. And being a part-time position, I wasn't free during the day to come over and take care of things, or work on parts, or to work on instruments that we'd acquired. And I used to leave a lot of the decision-making of the band to the student officers. The president is assisted by a vice president who also served as a tour manager. And as a side, I remember there was a while there they thought one of the job descriptions of a tour manager should be that he had an automobile so he could travel around to girls' schools and arrange concerts. You see, that's why, as being a male group, we went to Vassar, to Wheaton, LaSalle, Wellesley, Smith College, Mount Holyoke. We were girls' schools. And they really mixed very well. Jumping ahead a few years, when I was conducting the orchestra, we also were trying to get out to women's colleges. We combined more than once with Wellesley, and also more than once with Smith. But I noticed that the orchestra didn't mix as well as the band did at the girls' schools. The men in the band always were ready to dance with the girls, but the men in the orchestra were back talking bowings or something like that. A bow down bow, that's one. I remember one of the directors came over to me and says, "Don't your men like our girls?" And I had to press the words, mix a little more, and there again, the officers took care of it, and it worked out all right. I'm deviating here but some of the combined concerts with the girls' schools produced some wonderful music, one of which was the Festival Preludium, I think it is, by Richard Strauss, for double orchestra. And not only a double orchestra on stage, but I had something like 8 or 10 trumpets in the choir loft for an offstage trumpet effect. It was wonderful, wonderful piece. I have a recording of that. But getting back to your question on the concert band, since officers were elected and chosen and elected by the students, I gave time always for the officers to make announcements, in which they would do. They would periodically have mixers of refreshments. So there was a social side to the band, to rest their lips and get them to meet each other. They needed to meet each other and know each other. And of course we now have many examples of when the band became more co-ed, of people who mixed and ultimately married. A lot of married couples came out of the band association. I can almost see a whole collage of faces. Saxophone player who married a solo clarinetist. I can see those people coming together, and that sort of thing didn't didn't go by unnoticed. I know I was happy that was happening, that they were meeting each other, and I've had a lot of letters over the years that if it hadn't been for the MIT concert band, I would have quit MIT. That was the reason that kept me coming back. And just recently, had a communication from a clarinetist, Pauline, who said, "You have no idea how many people were on the verge of suicide, but the band kept them going. They realized they were important to the band and would be missed." And it kind of shook me up. Can't think of Pauline's last name right now. Played second clarinet. It didn't seem to matter so much what they played on their loyalty. Dick Nordloff played second clarinet all the time he was in the band. And I was a bit surprised when we had our final concert, May 1st, that Dick Nordloff sent for flute parts. He had transferred to the flute, and he was here. Nordloff has contributed $5,000 to the John Corley Concert Band Fund. Tremendous dedication to the band. Some people send $50, some people send $100, but he's pledged or given already $5,000 to the fund. It meant that much to him. And he never played more than second clarinet, but felt privileged to be able to do that, to be a part of the bigness of the thing, of the sonorities of the thing, to contribute that little bit, you see. He ended up contributing a lot of money to that. I tried to involve the concert band also in programming, and they were always coming up with me. I heard a piece at a festival or something. Do you know such and such a piece? If I didn't know it, I would look it up and try to get my friends at Carl Fisher, which was then existent, to chase that, to try that, to find that piece. And a number of pieces came into the library because of students interested in them. They also developed a habit of looking for original pieces, manuscripts or pieces that were written, commissioned by other groups for band, not arrangements of show tunes and that sort of thing. The policy of going into original music didn't come in until 1952, 53. We'd been going a while, playing polka and fugue from Schwanda, those extra trumpets, and organ. We played some good transcriptions, but we also had an orchestra that was playing polka and fugue from Schwanda. It sounds better in a concert band than it does for an orchestra. I've done it for both. I'm talking too much.
You're doing beautiful. There's a tremendous spirit with MIT Concert Band. I just wanted to get some more insight into that, and it seems that it's because you're giving the students a lot of responsibility, and it's not just a matter of them showing up and you telling them what to do, and so that there has to be that sense of community in order for that to work. And that's quite extraordinary.
Well, a thing that became very evident to me early on was that these students didn't come to MIT to be musicians. They were here to study something else. And that the music was to be an important avocation, not the reason for their being here. And so when a student came up and says, I'm going to have to miss Wednesday's rehearsal, I said, well, it's a big one. Can you come in for any part of it? Can you come in for the last half hour? Or come early and leave early? So that they knew they could talk to me about the attendance problems. I remember not the first time, but I had the Hindeman Symphony on. This was a second semester finale concert. And 5 minutes before the rehearsal was to begin, there were about 10 people there. Because they were coming, but by the time it was 5 after the hour, there was enough to go ahead and start the rehearsal. But they were busy. And if I'd given them a hard time, said, you gotta be here or else, they might have given it up. They wouldn't have been there at all. And by cooperating with the students, knowing their academic pressures, I think I had more support because they know they could talk to me. I used to try to spread the talent, that's a hard word for me to say because of my throat, around, so that the best players weren't always the first players. Because I needed, if this is a first clarinet, second clarinet, third clarinet, probably the best clarinet's right here on the end of the first clarinet section, the next best on the end of the second clarinet, and the third best, usually underclassmen, on the end of the third clarinet. So if I had to, at certain passages I could say, just the outside desk play on this passage. And then everyone else come in at the tutti, or mark such and such a spot, tutti. And so I could thin it out and still have have very adequate players on the ends of the sections. Now some groups, Dartmouth in particular, would rotate players. As soon as they finished a number, the band would stand up and they'd all be shuffling around, finding different chairs. I never got that organized that I could work out a rotating schedule like that. Because I wanted if the rehearsal started at 8 o'clock and finished at 10, I wanted them to be as busy as possible from 8 to 10, except for the break of the intermission. And that didn't mean that only the best players were playing certain numbers, that they were all on stage. And if I was working with the outside players for a certain solo passage or ripiano thing, the ripiano players were there and waiting for this to terminate or to be finished, and then we'd involve everyone. So I tried to keep everyone busy. Because if they're not busy, even though they're on stage, their mind is going to drift back to whatever I got to do when I get out of this rehearsal. What's on the desk waiting for me back at the room, you know.
There's also a musical respect that they had, because you also had musical and artistic standards that they respected and that they strove for. I mean, the last interview we talked about some of your rehearsal techniques and stuff, and so you worked with them in the context of their demanding academic schedules and stuff, but it seems that they also had a tremendous respect for you as an artist.
Well, they turned me on as a musician. I can remember many times coming to rehearsals and so tired, because I had been going all day in Brookline, and the Brookline job involved not only the public schools but the Brookline Music School, the Chamber Music Society, the youth concerts. There were many hats that I had to wear, and that. And I hit to MIT, and it's going to be a long 2 hours. And walk in and hear them warming up, hear them practicing passages, and you know, their way of warming up wasn't to be playing a pop tune, but to be working on the parts. And you'd hear them working. And more than once I would hear the drum section, which was usually moving equipment, after a rehearsal, have their own little rehearsal on a certain passage. They'd stay overtime and work something else by themselves. But their energy, their enthusiasm for working on parts would turn me on and bring out whatever musician there is in me to make music.
Mm-hmm.
I think I owe some of that to Arthur Fiedler too, because I played, and he was my college at BU. He led the BU Symphony, and I was the first trumpet, and later played for him at Symphony Hall, and we were on committees together, so I got to know Fiedler and would drive him to rehearsals when I had him as the conductor for the New England Intercollegiate Band and took him to all those rehearsals. But Fiedler was always upset if something was boring, if it wasn't interesting, and fight dullness. And I can remember sitting at Symphony Hall with Harry Ellis Dixon and Fiedler judging candidates for youth concert solo positions. And Fiedler would be sitting there, dull. He was annoyed because somebody was playing something that was very dull, to keep it always active, keep it alive. And that means even on a sustained note, depending on what the role of that note is, it either should be going somewhere, maybe intensifying, or maybe pulling out of the way for somebody else who was intensifying. That there was always some something going on. You could do that a lot by asking for well, I can't sing that anymore, but I used to ask them, feed the half note, feed the note, color the half note. Where's the climax of that phrase? Where are we building? Where's it going to terminate? And many times you say your crescendos are better than your diminuendos. It's easier to make a crescendo on a wind instrument than it is to make a controlled diminuendo to have the sound. Of course, I used to say that the better the band, the softer they can play. And that's right. That means that just touch it. They can just touch it. Being a brass player, having played a long time in a lot of churches, I learned how to play softly. The Boston Brass Quartet was the house band at St. Paul's Cathedral for 10 years. It was every Sunday, 52 weeks of the year. Sometimes 3 times on a Sunday in certain seasons. Incidentally, I learned just yesterday that Bob King had died.
No.
He died December 2nd.
Oh, no.
And Herb Philpott called me. You know Herb Philpott?
Right.
Yeah. Herb called last night and said that King had died. And that really did a number on me. Bob King was the bottom of the brass quartet. I was the lead cornet, and Bob was on the bottom. My brother was the trombone, and Bob Boudreau, later Al Ball, was the second trumpet. Well, we were using cornets. We played cornets. So they were all, except for the trombone, conical instruments.
So I want to ask you a little bit more. I've been really struck by the number of really fine student performers and composers at MIT. And is there anything you want to talk about, why that is? I mean, because people don't come here primarily to be musicians, but there are so many wonderful musicians and composers, student composers, that consistently each year there's a crop of freshmen that come that amaze me.
Well, I understand Albert Einstein played violin. No, I never heard of how much of a violinist he was, but I think an intense brain activity naturally is attracted to music and making music. And gee, I'll never forget walking along Building 4. It was Building 4. I was walking along there. I forgot what time of day it was. But as I was coming by one of the labs, I heard a string quartet. I thought, gee, that's a lousy recording that they have. And this piece stopped, and it started up again, and I realized that there was a string quartet in that lab rehearsing or passing the time playing a string quartet. And so I never looked in the door or anything, but I visualized that it was probably a professor who played a string instrument and 3 of his students while somebody was cooking on the burner, and it all seemed to go together. I think it's natural that people who are good thinkers, think well, want to be in music or like music as an avocation. I never have said this to the students, and you may want to edit this out, but I characterize MIT and music. There's no substitute for brains. You know, we're able to do things at MIT that I couldn't do at the conservatory. And I also taught at BU. You know, there was a level of mental activity here at MIT that made the difference. That to a piece of music that would fall flat at conservatory become alive at MIT. And when you turn that energy, that intellect, into composition, you're going to get something interesting. Andy Kasdan's music was interesting. I'm not sure how intellectual it was. Andy was one of those composers who would play something at the piano and then copy it down. He might be playing on the white keys, which means automatically 2 sharps for the B flat instruments, 3 sharps for the E flat instruments, and so on. Rather than put it in another key. Then he'd get up on the black keys, he'd copy that. That might have been the best part for the wind instrument. Now, MIT composers. Of course, Gregory Tucker was the first of them MIT composers. He was on staff, he was a pianist, and very good. And his is there a Tucker here? I've forgotten. Faded and Allegro?
Yep.
Great Tucker, yeah. And he was staff, and his piece is still a very good piece, wonderful piece. One of the earliest pieces written for us was by Ernst Levy. Do you know that name? And his he called it a suite for band, I think, but it was actually variations on the Swiss national anthem. And as I recall, it started out with a fantasy on a counterpoint based on the tune. And then it went into various variations in various meters, and each variation got more simple, and finally you ended up with the anthem itself, like Ishtar variations of Ishtar, who died, Vincent Dandy. The most complicated variations were at the beginning, and by the time we get to the end of it, the whole orchestra was playing in unison. Levy is not a crowd pleaser, though, for some reason. It ends with an anthem, and you feel like standing up and crossing your heart. But what an experience it is to play, and to conduct. Student composers had an outlet when I first came to MIT, which was the MIT Tech Show. Do you have any Tech Show recordings?
I think we do.
Is that? I have some, and well, you know, I'll better bring those home and give them to you before it's too late. And the student composers who wrote Tech Show, student to a student book, did some awfully clever things. And I more than once did the orchestrations, and a number of shows I conducted in the pit, which was my favorite kind of conducting. And to be doing a show for MIT and to be in the pit and knowing a funny line coming up, and the whole audience would laugh at once, for two reasons. The acoustics were such that they were hearing it quickly, and secondly, they're all smart, so they got the joke right away, and it was fun listening to things explode like that. Lock, Scotch, and Barrel was one of them. We had a bagpipe in the pit. Big brass overture and suddenly bagpipe. Wow. Goosebumps thinking about it.
I'll be back. I'll be back in a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to turn the tape recorder off just for a second here.
The students who wrote serious music for the band were not that many. I happened to see a score this morning. I was looking for some material by Brett Vanderlyn.
Oh yes, I remember him.
You remember that
I
name?
certainly do.
I'll be darned. And he wrote a piece for us, and I think he had in mind an extended work, maybe even a symphony. But what he finally got onto paper and into parts was only one movement. And we did that. We played it, and it was subsequently taped at the concert. Brett Vanderlyn was, if that's the way to say his name, I forget, was clarinetist in the band. Trying to think now some of the other student composers who wrote serious music for us. I'll be reminded of them.
Well, there were the two pieces you did last spring.
Oh, yes. Well, they were. One was by Jeff Morrow, and he had studied composition here, and also it was Peter Child, and both, I think, very interesting pieces.
You mean Adrian Child?
Adrian Child.
Yes.
What did I say?
Peter Child.
Peter.
He's a composer
I meant,
here.
Yes, of course.
Faculty.
Adrian. I think they're both pursuing composition
That's
now.
right. I hear Adrian's doing quite well.
And now Alan Pearson was another very gifted
Yes.
performer and composer. He wrote a piece for us that we did at commencement, fanfare, which was anything but a fanfare in the usual sense of the word. It was quite a difficult piece. Jeff Morrow wrote some music that we used for commencement. He also wrote a suite for band, several movements, and very, very clean, good material. Bill Grossman wrote pieces for the brass, and Bill is still conducting Cats, in New York.
Oh, yes.
He's been doing it for 25 years. He says it pays the rent. And Bill has been of tremendous assistance to me over the years. And on the Gregory Taka, Prelude and Allegro, we had a set of parts but no score. And Eddie Madden roughed out a lead sheet for me from some of the parts, and so I had a score that had only the melodies in it. And occasionally a hint of what might be going on in the base or something. But Bill Grossman took all the parts and took the best parts, the cleanest parts, and reduced them and produced them through his computer into a score, and then ran off parts, and really spent a lot of time and extra trips up here to Boston from New York to go over the parts and score with me. So we now have a beautifully clear copy of Gregory Tucker's piece. And we need to do that with some of the other manuscripts getting into the computers.
Absolutely.
So they're available.
Speaking of the manuscripts that you have in the commissioning program, there was the dissertation on the MIT concert band that Kenneth Ayoub had done in 1988. Can you tell me this circumstances of that and how you got to know him and the whole project?
This must have happened about 11 or 12 years ago. I don't know the date of that.
1988.
1988. All right. Ken Ayoub, I made available to Ken Ayoub the tapes and scores that I had of the manuscripts that had been written for us. And I spent the summer pulling out the performances of the various pieces that had been written for us. And he took them, and I haven't seen his thesis, but presumably went through them, and he evaluated them too.
Every single one of them.
He did.
And there's a thematic index in there too.
Yeah. I need to see that. I spent the summer really supplying tapes and scores to Ken Ayoub, so I'm going to be very interested in what he finished, what he produced as a result of it.
So how did you get to know him, or how did he come to you? Was he a student of yours at any point?
No. I seem to remember that his wife played saxophone, and she may have been a teacher for me at the Brooklyn Music School, or somehow. I don't know what instrument he played, if any. But I think her name was Virginia. But he contacted me. Yeah. Was one of his readers Frank Battisti? Does it?
Well, the dissertation was from the University of Northern Colorado.
Oh.
Let me see if it gives in the advisor. Sometimes on the thesis page, it does. This says University of Northern Colorado, Graduate School. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Kenneth Singleton. Oh my goodness. And then here's his advisors. Yeah, Richard Bourassa and Harvey Ruda.
Huh. Why do I know that name?
He's a Charles Ives scholar. He's at Yale University now. If it's the same Kenneth Singleton. And don't know if it's the same person, but it could be. That's very interesting that he had heard about the commissioning program, and not by way of being a student of yours, because he seemed quite impressed with the program and saw it as model that he wished that other schools of music and universities might follow to commission new music. And
Does he give any biography on Ayub as to where he was attending school? Was he in Boston? He was.
it doesn't say, but he seemed to know a lot about Boston, the local music scene. He makes many references to local things, as though he was familiar with the area.
She was in the musicians union.
Uh-huh.
She was in the union, and somehow I thought he was doing the conservatory or something.
It might be that he'd done like a master's degree or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because Frank Battisti could have pointed him in my direction. And more recently, a man whose name I don't remember right now wanted to do a similar thing. And I said, you know, that it has been done by Ken Ayub. And I think I said that this book was available here at MIT. And he dropped the subject. He didn't call me anymore. He'd been in touch with me quite a bit to come see the manuscripts and all that. So it was ground that had already been covered.
So how long did he work with you when he was doing the research?
All one summer.
Wow.
Yeah. It took up a lot of time that summer, I remember.
Wow. Wow. Wanted to follow up on just one more thing that we were talking about a little earlier. The support that the arts have at MIT is extraordinary. You hear about other schools where they cut back on the music program when the budget gets tight, and that certainly doesn't seem to have happened at MIT. The support seems to grow for the arts and music at MIT.
Well, there was a cutback 2, 3, 4 years ago that terminated our going on tour.
Uh-huh.
The budget went down quite a bit, and there again, I was never really on top of the budget matters. That student officers that investigated that, but suddenly we didn't have the funds to go on tour anymore, and the concerts were always free of charge. We didn't have any money-making operations. The John Corley Concert Band Fund was established about 10 years ago to make music money available for special projects like commissioning of composers or producing the CD or that sort of thing. But I didn't think it should pay for bus transportation or motel rooms or anything like that. That fund, incidentally, is at a level of about $63,000 right now. It's been terrific. But there was a cutback that curtailed the traveling. But I've always felt there was good support, from the music section on the concert band. I think they appreciated that it was important to the students to have such an activity going on, as well as the vocal work. The choral society became what? The concert choir? What is it?
Yeah, there's the MIT concert choir, and there's a chamber chorus now too. Yeah.
It was all important to the life at MIT, emotional, um, therapeutic value of music like that, and MIT's concert band was one of them.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about is MIT over the years has had many faculty members who are accomplished musicians who aren't in the music department or the music section, and if you can tell me about some of those people that you knew, and had you done any performing with them, people like Jay Kaiser and Doc Edgerton and folks like that. Are there any people that you remember working with?
We never worked with Jay Kaiser, although what a nice thought that would have been. I think his forte is jazz.
That's right.
With his group, and we always see each other at commencement time. Where he has a group out there, and there was somebody else in his group too, who's since deceased. I forget now who that name. Doc Edgerton, I didn't know was a musician, but his daughter or granddaughter was a flute player in the band, and he housed some of the musicians who came to visit. You know, he was very cooperative and helpful on that. Trying to think who some of the other non-music department people there might have been. You mentioned Edgerton and Jay Kaiser.
There's a gentleman whose name I can't remember. He was a clarinetist. He was like a dean of humanities or something, and I'm just blanking out on his name. He was a jazz clarinetist.
I grabbed this at the last minute. You see,
oh my goodness. Wow, a timeline of music at MIT. Wow, this is fantastic.
Why don't you hold on to that?
I can make a copy of this and give you back the original.
Well, it's been in a dead file of
Okay.
mine, and I went up attic to look for something else and found that instead.
Wow.
But does that give you a clue as to who that person might have been?
Oh, let's see here. Not right offhand. I might be able to get that before you leave. I also wanted to ask you about Herb Pomeroy.
Oh, yes.
We're going to be doing some interviews with him as well. He's coming next Tuesday.
Good.
And tell me about what you're working with him, and just what jazz. Tell me about the jazz at MIT from your perspective.
Well, thanks to Herb Pomeroy, and I was going to say, and people like him, but I'm not sure that there are any people like him. I never worked with Herb. I knew Herb, of course, and always felt that we were in very good hands with Herb Pomeroy, and he was certainly much loved, I think, among his players, because there was some overlap of personnel, but I can't shed much light on that. I'm not sure whether this timeline list gives any of the other people I think it mentions Herb Pomeroy.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember much about what jazz was like when he came and what effects he had on the jazz program?
Seems as though when I first came there was a jazz band called the Tectonians.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's right.
And who led that?
I'm not sure.
Who preceded Herb
That's
Pomeroy?
what I want to ask. I want to ask Herb about that. There were a lot of student-led groups that later were led by faculty
Huh.
and such. And that might have been a group like that. Did you ever hear the Tectonians? I know they would play at various hotels downtown. They were a paid group. They actually got paid for their gigs and stuff. Did you ever hear them?
Before, it should have been pre-Kresge, before the days
Yeah.
of Kresge Auditorium,
Yeah,
when much of the activity took place at Walker Memorial.
right. They played for dances, and one of the things that
Yeah,
that happened when Herb came is they became a concert
yeah.
jazz band, a
Yeah.
festival jazz band.
Well, there used to be something that we played for called Texapoppin or something like that. It was usually early in the year, kind of showed off the various groups on campus. The Glee Club would sing. The Tectonians seemed to play. The Logarithms
Mm-hmm. They're still around. Yeah.
would sing. And concert band also played. But that was over in Morse Hall. Wasn't that Morse Hall in Walker Memorial?
Yeah.
Yeah. The tech show used to take place out at Ringe High School, or one of the high schools in Harvard Square. I thought they were going to have a hard time justifying the Kresge Auditorium. They didn't think it would get much use, but wow.
Tell me about when Kresge was finished and how that had an effect on music at MIT.
Well, it got us out of Walker Memorial. I remember many rehearsals, we'd be rehearsing to the sound of dishes being washed, you know. We'd hear the kitchen packing up and dishes rattling and that sort of thing. I think it made it, formalized it a little bit. Because it was in 1956 that I was asked to do the orchestra, which I did for 10 years. And somehow there was a place in which to give concerts. And it seems like most of the rehearsals were there too. And only in the later years did we have to rehearse over in the Student Center, in the dining room or in the Sala de Puerto Rico. And rehearsal space was always a problem. And I always regretted at MIT that there never was really a rehearsal room with blackboard and chairs and stands that you could have a rehearsal in a rehearsal room, a place to store instruments and tuxedos and that sort of thing. I know there are always rumors of new buildings going up, or the warehouse, the storage warehouse being taken over as a part of MIT, and always was that hope that might be an improved situation physically. But I think Kresge, no doubt about it, helped the music program a lot. Things sounded better then, of course, and the light was good.
And enabled other outside artists to come, a more proper place for
Yeah,
visiting artists.
yeah, for chamber music, but also Boston Symphony played them at least twice.
Wow.
And I remember hearing Berlioz, fantastic symphony with Munch, Boston Symphony in Kresge. Wow. And you know, I sat up in the back row, up in the corner in the back row was the best spot to sit. And doing a quiet spot, gee, I think he had La Mer on that same program. In La Mer, I heard somebody's shoe squeaking. I kept thinking it was coming from the first violin section or the second violin section. The acoustics were so good. Wow. The presence of the organ, well, first of all, there was no organ. And I remember more than once trying some Gabrieli with half of the brass in the choir off, the other half over where the organ now is, for antiphonal effect. I'm not sure how well that worked. I know combining with the organ and the stage was difficult because of getting it together. We had a piece written for us, commissioned by us for organ and band by Geronimus Kaczynskis, a Lithuanian composer. And his friend Nomeka came down from Finland to be the organist and played at MIT. The reason I can remember his name, Nomeka, he Nomeka the notes in the 5/8 time. He had a problem with the 5/8.
Wow. So over the course of these interviews that I've done with you, I've been asking you lots of questions. And I wanted to open up the process here and just give you a chance to talk about memories and stories. If you have some funny incidents you want to recall, but you've been here for 50 years, and it's quite an extraordinary time. And so I just wanted to let you talk and on any particular subject that might come to mind.
Well, I've always appreciated the aspect of the MIT position as including new music, new works, pieces that had never been played before, for which there were no recordings to refer to or anything. I've always felt the musical challenge for a conductor was quite stimulating. And in the middle of the summer, I could be thinking ahead, well, next year we're going to do this. We've got a piece coming which we'll put in February. Here's a piece for next May. There was always something to be looking forward to. There was always the big question mark, who's going to be there to play it? What will we have enough horns? Will we have enough bassoons? The strengths of the sections, the depths of the sections was always a concern. It was hard really to finalize a program until you at least had one rehearsal and seen what the band could do. Um, um, the enthusiasm and the intellect of the students, musicians, always turned me on. And as I retired from the Brookline administrative position in the schools, it gave me more time to think about MIT and what was coming up. I still had my professional group to think about, so there was always plenty going on. And I used to tape rehearsals at MIT so that in my automobile I could listen to what the last rehearsal was, where I stopped in such and such a piece, what I would do at the next rehearsal. So I didn't have to come over and get back to the podium and look down and say, oh yeah, we need to do this. I had it all decided ahead of time. And by making cassette tapes of the rehearsals, it helped me shape the pieces too, the new pieces. This passage could go a little slower. This could build more right here. This is dull right here. Let's do something about that. And it helped me shape the new pieces. I felt that I was creating something. Somebody else had written the notes, but I was still bringing it to life. I was still giving those notes life. And when a composer would write to me or speak to me afterward, you really make more out of my music than I thought I had put into it. That was a bit of a compliment always, that I had seen something in the score that he hadn't noticed, or at least he hadn't marked. And working with composers was always interesting. Some composers were really so protective of their music that they got in the way. They couldn't shape the music because they were just breathing down every measure, and yet they wouldn't want to conduct. Or if they did conduct, they'd do so poorly that I had to really tactfully take the baton away from them and conduct it myself in order to keep the group together. It's not without its problems. Some composers really knew the concert band, knew how to write for the instruments. More than one composer didn't know the instruments, particularly the saxophones, what the range of the saxophones is. And of course, I think the most least understood instrument is the euphonium, or the baritone.
That's what I used to play.
And and what's its function? Where does it belong in the total score? And it was a learning experience for me as well, of course, to be taking a new piece and making it go. I've still received, even though I'm retired now from MIT, I'm still receiving pieces that people would like to have performed. I received a piece from Paris, which I'll be giving to Fred.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic. So are there any excuse me.
Yeah, I got away from your question. A lot of the wonderful memories are as a result of the tours. There would be things on tour that would come up sometimes in concert, sometimes between concerts, and traveling from one city to another. Um, in January or February, we had, I think, 3 trips anyway to Canada. The Canadian trips are always interesting, and some of the best audiences we played for were Canadian audiences. They really went for the contemporary music. As I used to try to balance the program to play the Mendelssohn Overture and maybe something late 19th century before playing some of the contemporary music. But the contemporary music would turn the Canadian audiences on. They were more vigorous in their applause. Always like to use student soloists. Student soloists with the band, student soloists with the orchestras. I remember one concert, one tour, spending quite a bit of time on the phone with the host in more than one case, more than one town, to make sure we had 2 pianos on stage for a double piano concerto, for a piece for 2 pianos in band, and that the pianos be somewhat compatible or matched, not an upright and a grand, but 2 comparable pianos, and that works out pretty well. We played some very challenging music on tour because we wanted people to hear the sort of thing they would hear if they were at Kresge Auditorium, not just a tour repertoire, not a pops type repertoire.
Are there any particular humorous moments or funny stories that come out of some of those tours and just being with the band? You've related some of those to me in the past. They come to mind.
Well, I need to be reminded. I've had to try to think through some situations. Is it worth telling? We were playing the Jericho Rhapsody by Morton Gould, which has to do with Joshua Fitt, the Battle of Jericho, and the trumpets and the walls come tumbling down. And I had an E-flat clarinet player. Named Moss. And he could play the shofar.
No.
And so we took a shofar with us on tour. And he would go, buddy, tuddy, 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 on the shofar. And you know, and I would have him demonstrate the shofar to the audience, because in the Jericho Rhapsody, the battle scene, there's the sound of the shofar. So that worked out all right. Well, during the concert, there was a cloud burst and suddenly a lot of rain. And you could hear it on the roof of the auditorium, of the stage. And the same voice who had demonstrated the shofar said, "You want me to build an ark?" And I was speaking to God, you know. That broke us all up. Chip Moss.
Wow. Wow.
That was precious. On the double piano concerto, having mentioned the 2 pianos, we had 2 student pianists, and there was a spot where on his piano over there and his piano him, they called for clusters to be played like this. Well, in rehearsals, we were running it through at a rehearsal, and the band started to laugh during the rehearsal of the piece, and I wasn't aware of it, and they pointed and they laughed, and I finally, one of the band players pointed to the pianist, and I went, instead of using their hands for the cut, they were sitting on the keys. They were using their buttocks to do the cut. They promised not to do that in performance. I think they dubbed the piece the Butt Concerto. But they could be a lot of fun in rehearsals. More than once, I would give a downbeat for a piece in a rehearsal, and they'd play Happy Birthday, and I would learn it was somebody's birthday in the band, and you know, it would take about a minute and a half or so to do all of that, to acknowledge, and I would be anxious to do the rehearsal, but they would still take time to do a happy birthday for so-and-so in the clarinet section.
That's beautiful.
Some of the brotherhood or the togetherness of the band, you know, which I think was very important.
Wow, that's...
I have a big fat book of memories that the band members have. I don't have it in my possession right now. Charlie March has it now. But for the 50th anniversary concert, alumni were requested to send a 1-page or 2-page letter describing what the band had meant to them. And I ought to bring that in, let's just see that when I get it back. But Charlie's organizing it, because some more has come since May 1st. Pages and pages of people who've written back to say what the band meant to them. Including photographs of their children and all that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, until Fred comes back, maybe you can start talking about, he was a conducting student of yours. And
for one semester, we're talking about coming upstairs, it was the second semester of his senior year at Boston Conservatorium, and it was a class of music educators who was conducting for music educators, you know, how to conduct choruses, bands and all, rather than how to conduct a Brahms symphony or that sort of thing. It was conducting techniques. And Fred was very good. Spent very little time with him, as a matter of fact. There were others that needed more help than he did. And then I think he went to New England Conservatory. I'm not sure. And then later out west somewhere. Got his doctorate.
so it must be nice for you to know that a former student of yours has taken over the wind ensembles here at MIT.
Yeah, I hope he'll become aware of the traditions of the of music at MIT, and let the students be the first consideration. That they're not here to be trained as musicians, but to have a musical experience that will support them in their other activities, both here on campus and
Oh, here's Fred
yeah.
now. So Fred Harris has joined us again, and John was just talking about some of his wishes for what he'd like to see you do at MIT here. And,
Oh, good. We need to do a playback so I can hear that.
Well, we just got to
we
that.
just got to that.
Oh.
Just got to that.
He asked me first about you as a student of mine at the Boston Conservatorium. I explained it was a class conducted for music ed people,
Yes.
and not a one-on-one situation where I taught you how to conduct a symphony or something like that. Although I think we did get into various beat patterns and all,
Mm-hmm.
but that I spent very little time with you because there are others, you were very good, and there were others who needed more help than you did. So I was not worried about you getting along all right in the classroom. So that semester went by too fast. As for what was the other point?
Well, you were talking about what you hoped that Fred would be doing at MIT here.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be helpful for Fred to be aware of the traditions and the background of where people are coming from, and the appreciation that people don't come to MIT to learn to be musicians, although that whatever experience they have in music should be first class. But the community, the social side of it, the therapeutic aspects of music is important to them as well as students to get them through MIT, and will be as adults when they go off into jobs that they become interested in music and become important to the community orchestra in whatever town they're in, or that if they're elected to school committees, that they vote for music in the public schools, and that they be an asset to the community in matters musical as well as professionally. I have so many letters over the years of people who've gone off to other parts of the country and had such fond memories of what MIT meant to them, and what the band had meant to them. And Paul Husby, for example, out at St. Paul, built a community band in which he tried to model it after the MIT band, and to play some of the MIT pieces. He was a student conductor of the band, and in fact he graduated, and he graduated and went off to St. Paul, and there was a tragedy. The newly elected president to succeed Paul Husby and his wife were bell ringers, and they had gone off to a bell ringing event out in Amherst, and I had an officers' party at my house in Bedford, and all the officers of the band were meeting at my house, and the time it came evening, and we were having cookout or something like that out in the backyard, and still no, I can't think of his name, I'm sorry right now, but he was not there, and his wife was not there. And so I got on the phone and called his residence, and somebody else answered the phone and says, "Oh, haven't you heard? He was killed in an automobile accident driving back from Amherst. Never did make it to my house." She was not killed. She lived. But John. Anyway, word spread quickly through the band, and Paul Husby, who had just been president, came back and did another year at MIT in order to be president and help the band through that crisis right then. That was. I'm not thinking too well. I remember his name, John something. I'll remember probably sometime. We commissioned a piece for that occasion, and the piece is called "The Lament for a Bell Ringer." By Joseph Cordero, I think it is. Cordero. Sir George Cordero, Lament for a Bell Ringer, 1978. Yeah. There again, it's a hard piece to program because it ends softly, but a lot of chimes, a lot of bells, a lot of mallets, a lot of bells in it. It's a hard piece to program, same as Challenger, Ron McNair is hard to program. Sorry to get caught up in that, on top of Bob King's death. Just remember that. Forrest asked me for anything funny that has happened. But
you supplied some good stories there. During this interview, we've been talking less about specific music things, but more kind of bigger issues. But here's an extraordinary moment. We have your successor here, and during this interview, and it would be really great to if Fred, you had some questions for him, and just seeing what the passing of the baton is like here. It's quite an extraordinary thing with the MIT concert band. And
well, I remember from the class when we first met, I'd always heard that there was this music going on at MIT and all this new music, but I never really, for some reason, never made it across the river over here. And finally, when I met Mr. Corley, there's this enthusiasm that he brought to the conducting class. And I remember you mentioned working with some of the students individually who needed extra help, and I remember him taking the time to really help some of the students who needed some basic fundamental things. And I can remember bringing in, I think you had asked us to bring in any piece we wanted to as kind of a final project, maybe to conduct or something like that. And I remember you were concerned because I think I brought in Candide or something. And I can't remember if there was a reason we all had to conduct each other pieces we brought, but you were both glad that I brought in a piece that was a little bit more difficult to conduct, but also nervous that the whole class was going to have to conduct this, and that how would that all work out. But we had a lot of fun, and I remember, I believe there was something happened, and I think you came in somewhat last minute. You didn't know you were going to have to do this, yet you had all these materials, and it was all prepared, and I particularly remember, and I still have it, a a kind of a package you put together with some Toscanini words and some notes and even a photograph. It was just great. I remember no one had ever given me an education on Toscanini before, and that was quite enlightening. But I remember that I immediately knew that this was a special person and that this was somebody I could learn from. And I never did get over here to hear any of the concerts. It was kind of, I don't know why, I guess. I did come over here and played with one of the jazz ensembles as a sub at one point. But that was my only connection. As you said before, there's some things could happen here that don't happen at the conservatory and make it, that are difficult to happen. And you're right. I've experienced that here already. I mean, it would be rare for me to teach any place else where I could teach a jazz ensemble, a concert band, and a wind ensemble. I mean, there's a lot of variety that's offered here that wouldn't necessarily, you kind of get typecast in other places, whereas here there's opportunity for that not to happen. And you had the same experience with conducting an orchestra for 10 years, and then also, and that wouldn't have happened, say, maybe at BU or another place, or even Boston Conservatory. So that aspect of it has been, it's been great.
Incidentally, my first name is John, Mr. Harris. Looking at it from the student's point of view, we're lucky at MIT in that to go to a rehearsal, there's a chance to play your instrument that you've had over the years that you took lessons on or didn't, but you've learned to play. But if I'm a student at a conservatory, another rehearsal, I will sit and wait and count measures and while the strings are learning their parts. And, we have an advantage at MIT that there's a thirst building up when there are no rehearsals for certain days. Now, this is the day I got a rehearsal. I'm looking forward to it. So we have that built-in enthusiasm on the part of the students that helps a lot. And then you need to capitalize on that and channel that enthusiasm and the intellect. I'm sure you're quite turned on when you're working with these students. I shouldn't have. I've done my.
So Fred, are there any questions that you have for John?
Well, I guess a couple of questions. Maybe one would be about all of the commissioning, and there's been so much of it. And how did you? I know I've done compared to you a small amount, and it's a lot of work to keep up with. Well, who's writing for me now, and when am I getting the piece, and all of those issues. And are the parts ready? Are they legible? And I guess I'm wondering, with doing this consistently, literally one or two, if not more, every single year, how did you keep up with it all? Because it's a lot of work. It's almost a full-time job on top of just directing music you already have.
Yeah, I was saying to Forrest, I'd be thinking about it in the middle of the summer, and some pieces would arrive during the summer. And I would say, whoops, we're going to need a really strong band for this. You better do it first semester. Second semester tend to drop off. The guys get busy. And so I'd kind of earmark this for December, this one for February, this one for May, and depending on the condition of the materials, and I mean by that even the page turns. I'm really uptight about page turns. It's amazing how many people will write music and right up to the last minute they turn the page, and they're playing up here too, like they have a third hand which to turn the page. Of course, with an amateur orchestra, I've been through page turn business. If there's a page turn in the string section, you reduce the sound by 50%.
Just don't play.
Half of each stand is turning the damn page. and with the Xerox machine, it's been such a lot of fun to fix up the page turns. And there's no reason the page turns can't be worked out. With composers, I'm grateful for composers sending parts. I've copied many parts over the years. I have boxes of manuscript that I've saved. Probably much of it ought to come to MIT because these are parts that were missing when I would write it out. But many pieces came to us, Fred, that I didn't know about, that we didn't request, or didn't even know the composer, and would be appreciative if we did this.
So in other words, the word got out that you were doing a lot of new music, so you didn't even, in some cases, have to pay for it. They just was sent to you.
Exactly. Now, another way that we receive pieces, an example is, what is it? Gosh, I'm having a hard time with names today. Rua, what's her name?
Elena?
Elena. Is it Elena, is it? Elena Rua. R-U, isn't it? R-U...
E-H-R.
Yeah. All right. She sent me a piece. I had done a piece of hers. And she had sent me a piece by a friend of hers. She said that she's never heard a piece played by a large group. And very high schoolers, even middle schoolers. And I still got to deal with that, to write a letter or something and say it doesn't look like it's worth the time that it would take to pass it out and run through the parts. I had some other pieces, I think they're still at the house, maybe they're in the stack at Kresge. I can't think of his name right now, but it was so difficult. I mean, the virtuoso bassoon parts, virtuoso horn parts. That, wow, what did they think we are? You know, it was really for a conservatory. Somebody who's on their instrument every day, studying, has somebody, a teacher who can help them with the parts. Then I had some junk too. One of which is an MIT composer. Oh, I've got to be careful now. Marek Zimbrowski.
Marek Zimbrowski?
Yeah.
You didn't like his piece? Oh.
Well, he's written more than one. He wrote Perks, an overture for a musical. And we made something out of it, and we did it, and taped it, and it's pop-ish, Boston pop type, not cheap. But hard to program. I used to put it on at the end of concerts. Yeah. So people, as they were putting on their coat, had something light in their head, although they couldn't whistle it or anything. Marek is still around, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Perks was the name of the show, an overture to the musical.
Because his other music is not like that at all. There's a string octet of his that I performed in, and it's quite atonal, and it was a very difficult piece. It was a really fine piece, and he told me about this band piece, and he was saying that it was quite different from what he normally does. And, That's interesting.
Yeah, I think of it as being quite transparent, moving, show tune
Mm-hmm.
type. It's over there, I think, in the stacks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Other than just to shift the subject just for a moment, other than the commissions, the other thing that I'm fascinated with are all the pieces that have become, many have become standard repertory pieces that the MIT Concert Band with you gave the first premiere, the first performances of in the Boston area.
Yeah.
And in fact, the other night at the concert, I had a little pre-concert talk and mentioned that in fact two of the major pieces on that concert, the Persichetti Symphony and the Hindemith Symphony, were premiered by you the very years that they were published, 56 and I think 51 respectively, and in this very auditorium, you know, as the time I was speaking about it, and that I find is fascinating, and I wonder if you obviously had a sense of that this was historically important that you were giving these performances, but maybe at the time, you know, no one knew that these would end up being repertory pieces, although with Hindemith writing a piece like that, and even Persichetti, they did, I guess, become almost instantaneously repertory pieces in a repertoire that was just on its birth, in its birth stages, I guess. But
there are a number of pieces that fit that category. Schoenberg variation.
Right, theme and variations.
Well, I don't know whether the last time we talked, Forrest mentioned that Kusevitsky had turned me on.
Yes, we talked
on all the new music he was doing, and I was very impressionable at the age that I first was aware of Kusevitsky, when I was in college and back after the war. And I liked so much the new music that Kusi was doing. And his devotion to playing pieces, even though the audience might not like it, he would do it. And sometimes he would do it again the same season. He'd play a thing twice.
So he was quite an influence.
Yes, he was. And Fiedler was doing original music at BU with the orchestra. I remember manuscripts that we played with Fiedler. He was so difficult with the composers. Gee, I can remember, I can visualize him now when he discovered that somebody here had notes that were different than what he had in the score. He'd take the thing and throw it to the floor. Wow. Then he'd take the Beethoven 7th and he takes a damn fast that last movement. I learned early on that the Fiedler going faster in performance than in rehearsals. That if you're used to single tonguing something, you better be able to triple tongue it in case you, the Wadis of the Lalo or the Beethoven 7th. I think because he wouldn't drink as much in front of the BU concerts as he does at did at Symphony Hall. But go ahead.
No. It must have been a challenge to do some of those works where no one else had performed them at all, really, let alone, a non-music school ensemble. I don't think even those places were performing them. But to take a piece like the Hindemith Symphony, and certainly there were no recordings of it. You just had the score and the Schoenberg, which is very difficult pieces. It must have been quite a challenge to mount those at that time.
It always depended on people too, as to who we had for people. Where we had a baritone player who could play the Schoenberg. The Schoenberg, Forrest plays baritone. Don't make a note of that. There's nobody's a guest soloist. Well, it was. And everything I would tape a lot. I would tape rehearsals so I could hear them at home or hear them between rehearsals and see how I was shaping things. And there was the ever-present enthusiasm of the students.
Mm.
Because they knew it was important what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it would turn them on too, that they would come up with ideas for pieces. Yeah. Go ahead.
Was it difficult to obtain some of that music? I mean, even knowing about it must have been tough, but you were obviously aware of everything that was going on. But I would think getting a hold of some of that music back then might have been challenging
Well,
too. But
Carl Fisher used to be over in the store a couple of doors down from the Wang Center.
mm-hmm.
And they had been very good to me over the years, and during the war they used to send me stuff, the Army overseas mail, however it was, I forget the labeling now, but they would send new publications to me, which I would get in Iceland. I was the band director in Iceland for
Wow.
29 months. Did a lot of concerts up there, about 700,
Wow.
Including serious concerts for the Icelanders, for the Canadian troops, the American troops, the British troops, and I was very busy. But Carl Fisher would send me that stuff as it would come out, much of which I probably didn't get because of submarines in the North Atlantic. And after the war, I would spend a lot of time there, looking through new publications,
Mm-hmm.
and they would set aside stuff for me to look at next time I was in the store.
Nice.
Bud Warren Patterson, for months was trying to sell me a piece by Percy Granger. Percy Granger. The Fall of Rome, or whatever it was,
Oh, yeah.
and the Christian Harp.
Mm-hmm.
What is the name of that piece? The Power of Rome and the Christian Harp.
Mm-hmm.
We score and all that. Organ, optional strings, and then finally he reduced the price to $25. And I had it with me. I paid him right then. I bought that piece. And my gosh, so we did the Power Room and the Christian Harp more than once, especially during those years where I had the orchestra as well,
Mm-hmm.
so I could add the strings. And the organ was there in so what a piece. I forget where I am. You mustn't let me go on.
So to tie things up, did you have a final question for him?
Let's see.
It's just here's a wonderful opportunity to
Yeah.
have the changing of the guard, so to speak.
Right.
99. Did I give you this? Yeah.
Yeah, I made a copy of your list. And
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
had made
Yeah.
those numbers there. Yeah.
This is a more recent list than I am. Oh, I thought I had 65 composers.
So what we're referring to
And
here is the
13
MIT
MIT.
concert band repertoire list, and I had made a list of
Yep.
there are 65 composers, 13 MIT composers, and 145 compositions.
Yeah, I was looking for those figures and couldn't
Some
find
impressive
them.
figures.
And then I made a list, Fred. I'm not sure whether I gave it to you, but I'll run off another copy.
Okay.
I made a list of the manuscripts of the MIT manuscript, and I rated them most interesting, of medium interest, and of little interest.
Yeah. I don't think I have the complete list. You gave me a portion of it because I think that's all you had at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Just because it was written for MIT doesn't mean it's good. There's some junk there too.
I guess in closing, it might be nice to just hear, and maybe you've already covered this, but what you feel, John, are kind of the most important aspects of the band that have been of the band, and the most meaningful aspects of it to you, I guess.
Yeah. We went over some of that, but you might have some new thoughts as well.
I hope I can say this, but I think the student involvement, I think one of the aspects of that I was sharing all this music with these people, and they were sharing their talents and interests and energies, and people would come up, do you know such and such a piece? We played it on Oregon or Allstate or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the involvement, the student involvement. The fact that it was, the band wasn't my band, and that I was the musical advisor, so to speak. The band belonged to the students, the student officers, and they ran things, and they would tell, can we have 15 minutes for a meeting? And when would you like it? During the break, at the end of the rehearsal, or whatever. So I was there as the musical advisor, and the professional on the scene, so to speak. Because people were taking it for credit, and they needed to be professional conducting. I couldn't let a whole rehearsal be conducted by student conductors, because that would be shortchanging those who were taking it for credit. I'm not sure I've expressed that well, but
No,
Yeah.
makes sense.
So one final question that I'd like to ask is, Fred, what brought you to MIT? What interested you? I mean, obviously you had known John and had heard about the program here, but when you saw this job advertisement, why did you go for this one and not some other places?
Well, the practical reason was that I was about to be married to someone who was finishing her degree program in this area, so I really needed to have a job in this area. That's the more practical response. But the other reality was that as I said before, I love the idea of the possibilities that a place like MIT affords that other places may not. Also, the fact that there's this immense faculty, there's talented students, and so much quality music going on in a place that's not a music school, where people aren't, as John mentioned, aren't here to become musicians. It's something that's a part of their life and an important part, but it's not their main focus. Yet a lot of high quality music making goes on, and I think I felt it was a position that would allow a lot of growth for me, and would allow me to be able to hopefully provide some help to students to grow through music, and hopefully that's what will happen.
Wow. So I want to thank John so much for your it's so generous of you to come and take part in this these interviews. It's been an extraordinary experience for me. And Fred, it's been really great to have the two of you this final interview. And so I think we'll close here. And but I want to thank you again, Doug, very, very much.